Killing Hannibal by Tom Julian. Hannibal Dacha. These darn Traveler 42s with their bumpy sublight drop, I'll have to get that looked into. I mean, if I can't stand it, then I wonder how customers feel. It's got the finesse of a danged Winnebago anyways. We can't sell garbage to people. The Traveler 42 twisted and lurched as it came out of sublight. Its inertial dampers struggled to keep up with the loss in momentum. The 42s really were a lousy ride, but they sold on reliability and price. Still, Hannibal disliked the vehicle, even though he had designed it. He recorded his arrival message. "This is Hannibal Dacha of Highland Offworld LLC, checking in and dropping a marker. I am in command of a flying bathtub called Hercules. I've arrived at Savas for the meeting with Foreshka. He's a Glocks trader, so I expect this to be somewhere between unpleasant and infuriating. I wouldn't even be here if the reports hadn't been so promising. Something called a sabatin, a creature that can be trained to replace infantry. We'll make a killing selling these to the Assault Corps. With the losses on Phaelon Prime, they'll snap these right up. Of course, Penny will need to find a way to rebalance the Phaelon after this. Our heartbeat monitors let them track the exact location of any human. But the Phaelon aren't paying customers. Maybe we let it go. It's been a heck of a fight already." The planet Savas was the size of a purple dime beyond the windscreen, and its 2 moons hung like pinpricks. Hannibal put the 42 into an arc that would get them there within 2 hours and set the ship for Autoland. He checked the cryogenic chamber in the back for the 3rd time this morning and picked up a crossword puzzle. He put his feet up on the console. At 4:10, he had to slide down in the seat a bit so he could reach. 4-letter word for trouble. GLOX fits there, seriously? Other voices. Other worlds. Besides the most detached scientists operating under extremely controlled conditions, exposure to aliens is a universally unpleasant experience. People that haven't experienced xenocontact often have a misguided notion that it is going to be like meeting long-lost cousins, but nothing could be further from the truth. Contact usually begins as an overwhelming experience and becomes in turns traumatic, confusing, incomprehensible, and often deadly. Alien evolutionary history, forged over billions of years on worlds nothing like Earth, leads to a drastically different understanding of the universe. Most confounding for humans is that the concept of the individual is the exception, and most alien intelligences tended toward the collective hive variety. Take, for example, the Tiaski. They live in giant, methane-filled underground collectives, writhing together in constant contact, communicating through electrical impulses transmitted through their tentacles. Physically, they look like ridged octopi covered with dozens of eyes. If such a creature was just an animal, it wouldn't have been so disturbing, but its powerful intelligence made them somewhat like us. Yet its physical characteristics and collective mind made it an abomination to human sensibilities. The Glocks are a far less complex species, but that is all relative. They are evolved from ant-like creatures and are easily mistaken as human from across a room. Roughly 5.5 feet tall, they have cream-colored skin and a patch of thin hair covering their heads. If you get close, you'd notice entirely black eyes, usually hiding behind sunglasses, and skin speckled with permanent goosebumps. Beyond their physical characteristics, their manner also makes interacting with Glocks disconcerting. They'll flit about rapidly like hummingbirds, moving from a window to a console to within inches of your face within seconds. Their language is like taking a hacksaw to piano wire, and like most aliens, their odor is unexpectedly striking. Glocks possess a heavy, earthy scent reminiscent of something rotting deep underground. By the time Hannibal finished his crossword puzzle, the planet was taking up the whole windscreen. Down on Savas, the Glocks boss Foreshka had a human translator, a man named Ben who appeared to be some sort of indentured servant. The less Hannibal thought about that relationship, the better. But the situation was clearly not voluntary. Hannibal hadn't told Ben that he represented Highland. Not that Ben would have believed him anyway. No one was sure who ran Highland. The weapons manufacturer worked through intermediaries and subsidiaries inside of subsidiaries, and its location was a closely guarded secret. Hannibal had actually used the term mom-and-pop weapons shop to describe his front organization. Ben welcomed him on the video feed. Good morning, Mr. Dacha. A bearded sad sack of a man appeared in front of him, gaunt and tired. The only interesting thing about his face were the shining blue eyes sunken into his head. He fiddled with a bulky collar around his neck, the intention of which seemed to be to restrain him, but clearly served to humiliate him as well. "Hello, Ben. How are things today?" Hannibal asked. Before Ben could give a list of his laments, Hannibal went on. "Just wanted to thank you for setting up this meeting with your boss." Ben just stared, his eyes seeming to wish for death. He got closer to the camera and dropped his voice down to a whisper. "Fareshka won't let me sleep again. Bring me some pills, okay? He thinks it's funny. I've got some blue doozies, my friend." Oh, the Glocks. The only aliens yet encountered that had anything akin to a sense of humor. Too bad their jokes usually involve torture or their casual concept of death. Wonder if sending down some drones to just take what I want would be frowned upon. Fareshka appeared in the frame behind Ben. An awful sound came from his mouth, and Ben winced. The Glocks did his best impression of a human laugh, coughing like a seal choking on shattered glass. Before Ben could translate, the creature flitted away. "The dealings will occur over dinner," Ben exhaled. "He wants to have dinner with me. Dear Lord." "Dinner? Well, just tell Fareshka I'm goddamn delighted." The Alamo. The 42 settled into a wide clearing ringed by thick, squat purple trees outside of Fareshka's sprawling walled camp. Savas wasn't the home planet of any sentient species, but was a world overgrown with thick jungle teeming with wildlife. It was so biologically aggressive that even though it was more than capable of supporting settlement, humanity had avoided formal colonization. It had become a haven for smugglers, those engaging in illegal medical experiments and gun runners. The rich native pharmacology helped in the production of a variety of narcotics. In the next valley over, a facility Hannibal suspected was run by the USN churned out vats of terracine. In a rare occurrence, an interspecies economy existed. Human and Glock's lowlifers did business in the sprawling camp behind the walls. Hannibal checked the scopes and saw nothing aggressive nearby. He could see Ben and 2 Glocks approaching. He zoomed in on Ben. The man hulked forward like a prisoner heading to the gallows. Hannibal had been cultivating a camaraderie with Ben that might become useful during the negotiations. I can certainly use Ben to my advantage, Hannibal thought. But then he sighed. Why bother with the angle? Oh heck, I'll make Fareshka so rich I can just take Ben back to Highland and he'll never be missed here. At the 42's gangplank, Ben shook Hannibal's small hand. The man stayed in Hannibal's grasp long and mournfully, taking in the human touch and sighing lightly. Little did Ben know that the diminutive man wasn't exactly human, and he wasn't exactly mortal. Hannibal held his breath as he always did when he met someone new. Can he see me? Hannibal wondered if the many lives he had lived were somehow leaking out for Ben to view. A foolish thought, but a notion that knocked every once in a while nonetheless. Finally, Ben let go and led Hannibal back to the walled camp. The 2 Glocks who had escorted Ben flitted up to Hannibal's ship, but he lifted the gangplank and locked it up with a remote control. Tell them, she's all locked up tight and not to touch, Hannibal chirped as he waggled a finger. Ben screeched something in a hoarse approximation of their language, and the 2 Glocks sulked away like beaten dogs. Hannibal watched as they grumbled, scratching at each other in aggravation. There was always that moment when aliens were encountered in the flesh, when their other intelligence became all too apparent. One of them turned its head and stared directly at Hannibal for an instant, its black, soulless eyes uncovered by sunglasses. Hannibal saw 1,000,000 years of unfamiliar evolution there, an intelligence dissecting him where he stood. I said you'd have Fareshka pull their fingers off, Ben said, shooing the Glocks further away from the 42. Well, that was certainly nice of you. Hannibal smiled, trying to dash the urge to flee. They get pain, just not death. Weird. The Glocks opened the drawbridge to Fareshka's camp, a high-walled adobe circle surrounded by a 10-foot moat. We need to keep the beasts of the jungle out of here, Ben said dryly. I call this outside part the Alamo. Why's that? The fine Tex-Mex cooking? Hannibal tried to lighten the mood. It's because I'm probably going to die here. Ben kicked a stone. The fairy castle. Behind the walls, Hannibal saw what looked like a giant sculpture made of old spaceships. Freighters and lifters from a dozen species were fused together into a bulbous conjoined habitat. It's a giant hamster cage built by something with no taste. I'm impressed, I guess. A long and pointed Deveran frigate turned straight upwards made a precipice in the center of the assembly. Tiaski cargo holds arranged end-to-end like massive train cars made a ring around the outside. Phalon cruisers, Glock's ships, and human vessels of all sorts were piled together with little rhyme or reason. All of it was adorned with a garish rainbow of paint. That's the fairy castle, Ben advised with a mock flourish, the ring around his neck seeming to cause him sudden discomfort. All around the foot of the structure, human and Glock's traders bartered back and forth uneasily, generally using threats and pantomime. They exchanged technology mostly, but also animals and chemicals. Ben ignored the other human men and women and they him. They don't want your help translating? Hannibal asked. Ben drew close to Hannibal, whispering sternly, You don't talk to people like this. On cue, a woman in tight black hip-huggers walked by, flanked by two 6'8" bodyguards holding guns almost as big as Hannibal. The woman blew a smoke ring into Ben's face from a long black cigarette holder. When he coughed, she laughed curtly and walked off as if Ben had never been there. The back of an old assault corps lifter served as an entryway to the fairy castle. Hannibal recognized it as hardware produced by Highland, one of his designs actually. A half-dozen jabbering Glocks darted aside and let Hannibal and Ben pass. Inside the fairy castle was another interspecies mishmash of furniture and household items. The tall chamber was a repurposed Chakti cargo hold with organically ribbed walls the shade of a pomegranate. The common room looked like a consignment shop had collided with a circus. Jagged-toothed Glocks females lounged around on large semicircle couches, smoking bitter-scented herb through hookahs. A dozen chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing dim, uneven light. Curtains were everywhere, making a maze Ben pushed his way through. Connected to a far wall was a skeletal climbing structure that went from floor to ceiling. It looked like something from a playground, but adult Glocks flitted about it, going from the very bottom to the top in just seconds, and then coming down again. Hannibal tried to ward off the dank Glock's musk filling his nostrils. That's an exercise cage, I guess. Also, some sort of orgy rack when it gets late. Damn yelling and shrieking. Ben huffed and waved at the structure dismissively. Hungry? We don't have any human food. Water? Hannibal asked. Sure. Ben found Hannibal a glass and used a hand pump on the floor to fill it. Hannibal was unable to hold his curiosity any longer. How in all the spinning worlds did you end up in Foreshka's service? He inquired, asking with a smile plastered on his face. All about Ben. Ben eyed the floor and sighed, a smile sneaking to the edge of his mouth. I'm a linguist. I speak 26 human languages plus Glock's Chakti and Phalon. 3 Phalon dialects. I have doctorates in xenoanthropology and linguistics from Stockton University. Ben stopped and stared at Hannibal to make his point. Speak Russian? Hannibal asked, trying to seem delighted that Ben might. No, Ben said without further comment. So what are you doing here? Ben waggled his head and pulled on his beard. Oh, Jesus, man. You know that guy who parks his car at the lifter port next to 10,000 other vehicles? And some lifter drops a bolt or something? It's my ride that gets the smashed windshield. Always has been. I don't believe in luck, bad or otherwise. People make their own luck. Ben closed his eyes. For an instant he looked young when he opened them again, his blue eyes shining. So, I'm on a survey trip on Drusk Pika, and we meet Foreshka and his crew just by chance. They were engaged in some felonious archaeology. I speak Glocks, so I'm enjoying it actually. We had 2 lifters we came down in. 2 days later both lifters take off and I'm not in either of them. Everybody assumed I was on the other one. Foreshka took me as a gift. He thought it was hilarious. So that's my luck. Monkey House. A deep howl came from the top of the space. A male Glocks navigated through the exercise cage with impressive agility. He swung off a rung and dropped the last 10 feet to the floor, landing with a flourish. It was Foreshka making an entrance. His name simply meant boss man in the Glock's language. A female handed him a black, shiny jacket, and he put it around his shoulders. The alien immediately got to within inches of Hannibal's face and quickly covered his black, emotionless pupils with dark sunglasses. He went over to an armoire placed in the middle of the space and returned instantly with another black, shiny jacket, just like his, for Hannibal to wear. "Oh, that fits me perfectly," Hannibal lied, pulling it on. Over Hannibal's childlike frame, it was 2 sizes too big, and the sleeves went way past his wrists. "That's a big macho man jacket he's giving you," Ben explained. "A sign of respect, that's lovely," Hannibal replied. Foreshka jumped atop a low table in the common room, as if taking center stage. He coughed out the word welcome with a hideous gurgle that sounded like a saw going through a drainpipe. He repeated it again and again, and somehow it got harsher and more wrong each time. Finally, he stopped and coughed out an approximation of human laughter. He bared his teeth like a hyena, his shoulders twitching as if to retch. The other Glocks followed Foreshka's lead and began laughing as well. The alien cacophony echoed off the walls as the beings swarmed over everything, like the ant-like creatures they were. Hannibal fidgeted uneasily, and Ben drew close to either protect or be protected by him. It's like being trapped in a goddamned zoo. One of the Glocks dropped right in front of them, its speckled alien face twisted in a cruel imitation of a human smile just inches from Hannibal's nose. Hannibal jumped back, knocking over a lamp that shattered when it landed. At the sound, a half-dozen Glocks leapt up to the chandeliers and scampered to the rafters. The laughter went on and grew frenzied as Ben held his ears, looking to the ground and muttering. A Glock brushed past Hannibal, and one of its greasy fingers touched his neck. Hannibal spun around, lips quivering. He wanted to scream, and he found his hand on the heel of the pistol inside his shirt. Then Hannibal did scream, unable not to. He screamed at the top of his miniature lungs, and the place instantly froze. The Glocks stopped their chattering and melted away, leaving only Foreshka in the presence of the humans. The Glock's boss flitted away down a long, dark corridor. Ben caught his breath and rubbed his eyes. "Come on, it's time to eat," he croaked to Hannibal. Hannibal realized then that he held his arm straight out like a pipe, and at the end of it, his pistol glowed red, charged for killing. Ben was following his master. "I said it's supper. Come on." Sucker Glocks certainly understood pain and discomfort, but one thing they didn't have any regard for was the actual ending of life. If a Glock stopped living, its passing would barely register. The hive continued, and everybody else just went about their day. If anything, the Glocks perceived the concept of death as close to humorous, a peculiar function of corporeal bodies that had little impact on their hive as a whole, and to which they devoted no rituals. In Glock society, there was no mourning for the individual, nor any concept of history, so Glocks had barely any traditions and no religion. Having no religion was one reason why they still existed. Humans could have wiped out the Glocks on a Sunday afternoon. But without a theology, and with an inhospitable homeworld possessing scant resources, the assault corps and the clergy hadn't considered their destruction worthwhile. "Hello?" Hannibal said to the Glocks waiting in front of the doors to Foreshka's dining room. The Glocks just stared straight ahead, not regarding either Hannibal or Ben. After a few moments, Hannibal waved his hand in front of the being's face, and suddenly its head jerked towards him. Hannibal jumped back and the door spread open. The Glocks fell to the ground, lifeless and limp. Foreshka had propped a dead Glocks there and moved his head with a wire. Inside the dining room, Foreshka sat at the table, barking in laughter again. "Jesus," Hannibal exclaimed, looking scornfully at Ben. "Did you know what was happening?" "That was just his little joke," Ben shrugged, clearly in on the prank. "I don't find propping up a lifeless person a joke. Please tell Foreshka I hope he dies." Ben shrugged and screeched the translation. Foreshka just stared at Ben, his face betraying no reaction. "Don't think he follows that one. Glocks don't regard death much." "Oh, I know that," Hannibal hissed, "but I still hope he dies." For an instant he thought about his brothers, Sergei and Thomas, back on Highland. He was the only one out in the field. They're probably kicking back with wine and roasted lamb tonight. downloading my marker recording and having a good laugh at my expense. His brothers had given him a hard time for taking a meeting with the Glocks, but they had truly been concerned for his safety, and Hannibal had to admit to a twinge of fear in his belly. Hannibal felt suddenly aware of his mortality, or rather his legacy, or whatever it was that descended through his non-traditional familial line. Being around all this casual mortality made him queasy. Ben moved the dead Glocks aside with his foot, the manservant's every motion seeming to exhaust him, and Hannibal stepped over the corpse. Ben was a walking cadaver himself, maybe too consigned to his fate to recall to the land of the living. "Are we serving beef or chicken?" Hannibal asked as he stepped into Fareshka's dining room. "Look who's come to dinner." Fareshka's dining room was a habitat tank from a Deveron cruiser, a large transparent container with a circular table in the middle. The Deveron are albino, mollusk-like creatures that live in frozen tanks of liquid nitrogen, millennia ago combining their bodies with powerful machine components. Their space stations ring their world connected by a web of carbon fibers, like a planet-wide chain-link fence. The space was like a giant fishbowl, stained in spotty white patches where the frigid liquid nitrogen had clumped when Devoran swam in here. Ben pulled a chair out for Hannibal before sitting at the table and resting his head on a dinner plate. Hannibal sat where he had been guided, an indignant smile plastered on his face. For a moment, Hannibal again considered sending down drones to wipe out Fareshka's camp and just taking what he needed. But no, that wasn't his way. That wasn't the Highland way. The Dacha brothers came personally and politely and paid fairly. It kept questions to a minimum. Several Glock servants entered the chamber bearing trays of rotting fish heads floating in a muck that smelled like garbage water. A plate was placed before Hannibal, but he waved it off, the servant leaving it anyway. Hannibal looked over to Ben, noticing the bones of his shoulders showing through his dirty shirt. The man began to pick at the plate before him, but Hannibal coughed, capturing his attention. When Fareshka wasn't looking, Hannibal slid a packet of peanuts to Ben, whose eyes went wide with delight. Ben opened the bag and devoured the contents instantly, chewing open-mouthed with a childlike smile on his face. Hannibal took a utensil and pretended to pick at the dish in front of him, before remembering he was dealing with a being utterly indifferent to human norms. With a shake of his head, Hannibal swept the rancid, sticky fish plate to the floor, heads and entrails spilling about. Screaming in delight, two of the servants fought over the spilled delicacy and went to their knees to lap it up. Jesus, I've really got to hire some couriers. But this visit was truly critical, and he wouldn't even have offered it to one of his brothers. The Sabatin was rumored to be a revelation, genetically malleable, with exquisite musculature and deadly potential. If he could buy some samples and enhance them, they might be more profitable than the implosion grenades from 10 years ago, and those created tiny black holes you could throw at your enemies. "Tell me about the Sabatin," Hannibal asked Fareshka, and Ben coughed out a translation. The Glock slurped the rotting fish guts off his lip and flitted about the room, arms waving rapidly. He seemed to be pantomiming something and pretending to be some sort of hunched-over beast. He scratched the air with his bony fingers and showed his awful brown teeth. Hannibal thought he was getting the idea. He had asked Ben for specs, photos, etc., but Fareshka had forbidden it. Hannibal surmised that the Sabatin was a heavy beast about the size of a panther. By the way Fareshka slipped his tongue in and out of his mouth, he guessed that it was reptilian and vicious. What had truly drawn Hannibal here were the reports of the Sabatin's biological flexibility. Hannibal thought he might be able to grow bio-armor on its exterior and insert neuroimplants to allow it to be imprinted with programming, enabling it to be remote-controlled. He's pretending to be human, to give a presentation like's done in a human business meeting, Ben said. Hannibal nodded, noticing that the servants now stood uncommonly still against the clear glass walls. He hadn't noticed it before, but they were wearing bow ties like human waiters. All of this, the laughter from before, the meal around a table, this presentation, was Fareshka's gross attempt to imitate human behavior. Just smile and get through it. Hannibal watched the charade continue, Foreshka now jerked about fitfully, like he was connected to the strings of a puppeteer. Hannibal spoke to Ben out of the side of his mouth. "Ben, what does that collar do?" he asked. "If I go too far from the Alamo, it sends a bolt of electricity down my spine. I can also kill myself if I press this red button up here 3 times. I've gotten up to 2, but I just can't." Hannibal interrupted. "Ben, I'm buying you when I buy the Sabatine. Just get me the hell out of here as quickly as possible. We're not staying the night. Tell him I'll pay the asking price. No haggling." Ben sat up straight, nearly choking on his own dry throat. Just then Foreshka leapt up to the table, galloping on all 4s and screeching. His imitation of a horrific beast echoed off the glass chamber. Hannibal sat back in his chair and took a nip from a flask he pulled from his pocket. "Please just tell him. Full price," he hissed at Ben through gritted teeth. Ben waved his arms and screeched something that sounded confident and final. He crossed his arms across his chest to make his point. Foreshka stopped his absurd show and came down from the table to address Hannibal directly. "Go to hell," the alien croaked unmistakably at Hannibal, and then departed the chamber, his entourage of servants trailing him. "Did he just tell me to go to hell?" Hannibal asked incredulously. Ben rested his head on the table again, his excitement from just a few moments ago drained away. "He's negotiating," he said hollowly. "Negotiating? I offered asking price," Hannibal replied. "He's negotiating," Ben repeated, accompanying a sigh with dramatic air quotes. The goods Hannibal crept through the dim light of the fairy castle, his hand on the hilt of his pistol. The Glocks that were still awake ignored him and channeled by, sometimes in clustered droves. He caught the gleam of dim light off of vacant alien eyes that glistened in the darkness like black jewels. Rhythmic grunts and shrieking came from the common room, possibly the nightly orgy Ben had mentioned earlier. He didn't check on that theory. Hannibal descended a staircase into a chamber that was a repurposed locker room from a human transport vessel. He counted the numbers on the lockers, 22, 23, 24. He pulled out his pistol when he found locker 25 and turned it down to its lowest setting. Holding the weapon at arm's length, he blasted the locking mechanism and the door swung open with the heavy scent of burned plastic. Ben was wedged inside, standing up, his collar burdening him even during his repose. "Jesus, he really keeps you in here?" "Glock sleeps standing up. He thinks it's funny when I can't do it. I need some of those blue pills to help me sleep. You promised." Hannibal handed over a small bag of blue pills, and Ben shoved the treasure into his pocket. "You won't need them long. Show me the Sabatine." After the impasse at dinner, Ben had agreed to show Hannibal the Sabatine after hours. The plan was to assess the specimen, then wake up Foreshka with bags of money and run for the exits. Hannibal would offer a little extra for sneaking off to look at the Sabatine, but cost really was no object. Highland was so rich that the Dacha brothers didn't know what to do with their money. He'd also take Ben with him, and Foreshka could buy all the rotting fish heads he wanted. Ben led Hannibal through more of the mishmashed complex, through a sharp-angled red hallway that could only be from a Phaelon vessel, and through another common area made from a human prison transport. Maximum security cryogenic chambers lined the walls. One glowed green and still sustained someone. "That's Murray Vlosk," Ben remarked. "He killed 15 people on Chimera one Christmas day. He snapped and went around strangling. Yeah, this place is colorful." They went over a catwalk, and a gaggle of female Glocks squeezed past and around them, their humid and sour breath filling the air. Under the catwalk was a rounded enclosure made from a Devoran engine block. It was repurposed as an animal habitat with flat rocks, a cluster of thick purple brush, and a small pond. "Are you ready for this?" Ben asked. "I haven't been ready for any of this garbage." "Of course, Ben, let's see the show." Ben pulled a small knife from his pocket and sliced into his arm. He wiped the blood onto his fingers and flicked it out over the enclosure. The brush rustled. Hannibal caught something black and thought he spied a pair of bioluminescent eyes. "I'll have to dim the eyes if I want to use this for infiltration." Ben flicked more blood towards the brush, and suddenly a black beast leapt up just inches from them and landed hunched over and coiled. The Sabatine leapt up again, its flesh sizzling from the protective electric current when it managed to grab hold of the catwalk. It leapt up a few more times before growing frustrated and withdrawing to one of the flat rocks to hiss at the two humans. Instantly, Hannibal saw the potential of the beast. Beyond its glowing eyes, it was pure black, about 6 feet from nose to hindquarters. A powerful barbed tail extended another 4 feet. Its shoulders rippled with muscle, and it had forearms that looked to be able to tear the turret off a tank. The Sabatine had a face like a salamander and a silver-bladed tongue that flicked in and out. Almost on cue, a small rodent went by. The Sabatine speared the snack with its razor tongue and chewed up the flesh in an instant. Hannibal scanned the beast with his smart device. A large brain indicated that the creature was nominally intelligent. Still an animal, but it had plenty of potential to learn and adapt. "What's Foreshka use these for?" he asked. "Hunting," Ben responded with a smirk. "Glocks hunt these things? No, other way around. Yeah, that'll do. I'll fuse the DNA with nanotech and grow bioarmor over its torso. Drop some neurostims into the cerebellum and set up remote control and imprinting." Hannibal shook himself out of his reverie. He was getting ahead of himself and realized his mouth was open with joy. "How many you got?" he asked. "There's 60. Lots of smaller habitats. You can't put more than 2 together or you'll have much fewer animals very quickly." From behind came a ferocious bang and a plasma blast zinged past Hannibal's ear. He had his own weapon out when he turned to the threat. He found Foreshka standing there, holding a plasma shotgun still hissing from the blast. "How many?" the Glocks croaked in horrible English, clearly angry that Ben had taken Hannibal to see them. Ben was on his knees now, pleading and apologizing to his master. Foreshka swung his weapon from Ben to Hannibal, anger contorting his slim mouth. As he drew closer, the scent of terracine perfumed the air. Glocks practically bathed in the powerful opiate in doses that would be ludicrously fatal to humans. Foreshka's cheeks hung slack under his eye sockets, and Hannibal doubted he was in any sort of control. Hannibal realized he hadn't responded when Foreshka repeated his demand. "How many?" the Glocks asked again, wavering on the catwalk and firing another blast into the air. "My God, I'm sorry, Foreshka," Ben sobbed, hiding behind his own hands as Foreshka repeated his demand over and over. "How many? How many? How many?" Hannibal tried to get out the words but couldn't answer between Ben's pleas and Foreshka's demands. Finally, he got it out. "I want all. I'll pay double for all of them, deal?" There was silence for a moment as Foreshka lowered his weapon, staggering from the opiate that reeked on his skin. He twitched like he was shaking off a bee sting. Then came his awful alien laugh, curt and mocking. Following it came the laughter of others who had been drawn to the gunfire. The scene was similar to the common room, but worse. An obscene and awful cacophony echoed off every wall as the Glocks poured into the space. The aliens cackled and writhed like one being, crawling over each other and every available surface. Every part of Hannibal suddenly itched. Every inch of his body rejected being with these things, these insects hiding in humanoid form. This time when Hannibal opened his mouth to scream, he felt Foreshka's plasma burst strike him like a hot brick to the chest. He fell back and looked up. He saw himself lying on the catwalk, his image reflected in the polished dome above him. Dozens of Glocks descended on his prone form like ants on a dead mouse. Then there was another plasma flash before darkness. "Awake. Hannibal, wake up. Foreshka didn't like your joke." Ben's voice came to Hannibal through a haze. Hannibal's head swam. He felt his heart beating like a jackhammer. He was lying in the dirt, and his fingers dug into the grit. Ben hovered a dozen feet above him on the catwalk. He could make out the jittery motions of Foreshka behind him. He reached to his inner thigh and checked his nanomender packet, a medical device attached to his skin. The seal had been broken, and he knew that, although the plasma blast should have killed him, the billions of tiny medical machines released into his bloodstream had probably saved his life. He tasted their residue collecting in his mouth like bland metallic toothpaste. For the moment he was alive, but he suddenly realized where he was. "Oh God, I'm down here with that thing." He was in the Sabatine enclosure. He scrambled to a sitting position and found his pistol, still inside his jacket. "I wasn't joking about buying them all, Ben. Make sure he knows that." Hannibal moaned. the pain of the plasma blast searing through him. Foreshka responded in a series of screeches and croaks, and Ben nodded. It's not that. He didn't like when you said you hoped he died during dinner. Hannibal found himself on his feet now. He pretended to be more out of it than he was as he charged up the pistol. Glocks don't care about death, but they know what it means to humans. To wish someone dead is to hate them and to deny them pleasures. What the hell? Hannibal held his head and stumbled backwards a few feet. I need you to get me out of here, Ben. I will still take you with me. Hannibal spit out the nanomender residue. What's going on with you is wrong. Yeah, it's wrong. But I have to do what I have to do. With him, I know I'll wake up tomorrow. But you're stuck down there. Ben, if I don't come home, I've got brothers that won't stand for this. You're a dead man, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. Ben hung his head. I just know that Foreshka has a joke for you. What's the damn joke? Hannibal asked incredulously. You live through the night, and you get all the Sabatine for free. That's not a joke, Ben. That's more of a bet and not a good one. Foreshka crossed his arms, like a human would do when his case was made. He nodded to Ben, and the man pulled out a smart device. Don't, Hannibal ordered, but Ben only shook his head sadly. The energy shield flicked on above Hannibal's head, making it so the Sabatine wouldn't be able to leap up to the catwalk. Behind him, Hannibal heard rustling, and the purple brush stirred. He stood ready. He'd worked with dangerous animals before, and he was armed. His father had taught him how to train leopards for the Dacha brothers' family circus. He saw the animals' glowing eyes. For almost a minute they bored into him, not blinking or moving. He almost felt like the beast wasn't really there until he heard a low, breathy exhale. Hannibal ran through scenarios in his mind. His endless mental capacity whirred as he applied logic and developed and discarded a dozen tactics. He breathed hard, slowly wiped the sweat from his brow. He ever so slowly turned his pistol up to its highest setting. If I can maybe strike the beast in the eye with a shot. But in a second it was over. The Sabaton burst from its hiding place and took out Hannibal's throat with a single slice of its claw. Hannibal was alive long enough to see an arc of his own blood hang in the air and hear Ben exhale with breathless surprise. The beast then had its meal, quickly slicing poor Hannibal into bloody pieces. The 42 a heartbeat monitor aboard Hannibal's ship had been listening for the distinct thump of his cardiac muscle to cease. Now that it had, a protocol began. Close out Hannibal Dacha. Initiate Ivan Dacha. Download experience from Mark 36 module from the last 6 hours and 34 minutes. Pulling Mark 36 module lifetime experience from orbital marker. Inside the 42, the cryogenic chamber spun to life and a green glow filled the cabin. Images and sounds came to the new person within. Ivan Dacha wasn't exactly being born. It was more like his mind was being built on the fly as Hannibal Dacha's life experiences downloaded from the orbital marker, and his last moments were transmitted from inside the fairy castle. After Hannibal's experiences came his predecessor Joseph's, filing in reverse chronologically. Joseph was killed when he fell down a diamond mine on Chimera. After Joseph came Igor's lifetime. His lifter had depressurized over Luna. Then came all the rest, one after the other filling up this new vessel. Ivan's mortal shell had been completed years ago and placed inside this chamber for safekeeping. His body twitched, and the muscle inside his chest was gently shocked to beating. Ivan's first moments were like living through a horror movie. He saw through his late brother's eyes, a Glocks above him with his arms crossed, a dark shadow leaping, a gleaming flash. This is not good. Not at all. Dealing with the Glocks. What was Hannibal thinking? Still, they shouldn't have treated him that way. Plain awful to die like that. Let's not screw around. I'm bringing the drones. The cryogenic chamber creaked open, and Ivan Dacha breathed his first breath outside of the container. He stepped out onto the deck, nude, with vapor coming off his wet skin. He jumped a little as his feet met the cold floor. A drone floating nearby handed him a warm towel and opened a drawer where a change of clothes waited. Ivan dried himself as he pulled on the pants and shirt. The drone was ball-shaped with red, glowing tentacles hanging down. It helped him tie an ascot around his neck. Are you hungry? it asked in a deep voice. I certainly am, but we've got business to attend to first. I'm taking both of you. I'll call you Red and Blue since I'm not feeling creative. Out of a container, a second drone emerged, identical to the other except it glowed blue. What's our business? Red and Blue asked in unison. Ivan Dacha's first thoughts were dark ones that he would struggle with for the rest of his life. A person close to him, closer than any kin could ever be, had just been callously murdered, and he regrettably knew what his actions had to be. He picked up the crossword puzzle left in the pilot's seat that Hannibal had so diligently finished just a few hours ago and put it in his pocket. We're killing every Glox we see. All except the Alpha, called Foreshka. The gangplank of the 42 lowered, and half a dozen Glox scurried nearby, surprised at the sight of Ivan, a man identical to the one who'd just been devoured by the Sabatine inside the fairy castle. They all had tools for scavenging. Well, you were planning to make my old 42 part of the fairy castle, I see, Ivan remarked. With a wave of his hand, he indicated what Red and Blue needed to do. He checked his smart device while the Glox screamed, sliced apart by the drone's chemical lasers. Their blood smelled bitter, almost like a detergent. I hate the stink of these things. You know, Blue? There are Glox coming over the walls of the exterior compound. Blue responded. Oh, please kill all of them. Thank you. Several dozen Glox slipped down over the walls, more to check on the commotion than to threaten. Lasers like narrow flamethrowers tore through them, slicing their forms into charred meat. In a moment, burning bodies slumped all about, and Ivan stepped through them. Don't want to be late. Blue went ahead and neutralized the automated security measures by the gate. Then Ivan confidently entered the Alamo's courtyard, assessing the fairy castle beyond. Several human traders huddled around a campfire, too scared to run for cover. Ivan called to them, Red and Blue flanking him. Just enjoy your evening. I'm only killing the Glox. He ordered Red and Blue to enter the fairy castle and waited a few minutes outside for them to finish their work. Screams of the Glox and the awful whine of chemical lasers echoed from within the structure. The distinct smell of scorched tin hung in the night air. Ivan approached the humans around the campfire and motioned for one of them to pass over his bottle of vodka. With a shaking hand, the man handed it to him. Ivan took a short pull and returned the bottle with a smile. They stood there for a few moments, the diminutive man with his ascot fluttering in the breeze, and the rough humans, who dared not reach for their weapons. Nice night, Ivan mentioned. There are 86 dead Glox within. Blue returned and reported. With a smile, Ivan nodded to the humans, then turned and entered the fairy castle. He stepped over the slippery pools of blood and singed corpses in the common room, admiring the job the drones had done. Don't know why we can't sell more of these to the assault corps. Sales had been slow. Maybe I'll use the cam footage here for marketing. The two machines floated on ahead. Ivan followed and found Foreshka and Ben still on the catwalk over the Sabatine habitat. Red and Blue blocked the exits. Hi, Ben, Ivan said. As far as the man knew, he was staring at a ghost. He'd just seen Hannibal die before his eyes a half hour ago. In fact, he and Foreshka had stayed and watched the Sabatine consume him and had remained in the remote part of the complex during the commotion. I saw you die, Ben yelled. It looks like you watched me get chopped up and eaten raw too. Well, not me exactly. My brother, well, not really my brother, something more than that. We're pretty much the same. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening here. Ben fell to his knees on the catwalk and Foreshka stepped past him, baring his awful fangs. Glox didn't trouble over the death of an individual, but this was different. He'd heard the screams. He knew what had happened. This was the wholesale slaughter of his entire hive. The being leveled his shotgun on Ivan. That's a no-no. Ivan shook his finger. When Red saw the muscle in Foreshka's trigger finger move, the drone sliced off the digit with a laser. The Glox didn't seem to feel any pain from the wound and stood with surprise, trying to move a finger that wasn't there. Give me some blood, please, Ivan told Ben, and tell Foreshka not to move. Okay. The man scrambled to his feet obediently, adjusting the collar around his neck while conveying Ivan's order to Foreshka. Ben, I guess I owe you some answers. I know what my brother knew. I saw what he saw. I knew how kind he was to you, and I know how you helped this thing. Murder him." Ivan choked on that last part, still loath to acknowledge Hannibal's awful fate. "Who do I work for, Ben?" "I don't know. You never said." Ben made a cut on his arm and showed Hannibal the trickle of blood. "Wipe just a touch of blood on Fereshka, just a smidge." Ben brushed a few drops of blood onto Fereshka's shoulder. "That's perfect. That'll do. Ben, my brothers and I work for Highland. In fact, we are Highland. We're the guys who run it." "What?" "No, that place isn't even real." "Not real? Then where do you think all those boxes full of guns and ammo come from that travel out to every corner of space? We arm everyone that can pay and some that can't. We have a logo. Ben, tell him who I am." Ben's face contorted with something more than regret. He was a castaway who'd literally just missed the first boat to come by in years. He growled something in Glocks with a sadness and remorse that almost made Ivan pity him. When Ben was done, Fereshka's eyes went wide, and he seemed to have understood. The Glocks muttered something and repeated it again and again, finally screeching, "Ghost!" Ivan got a running start, and with surprising athleticism kicked the alien into the habitat below. Fereshka landed hard on a flat rock, and the Sabatine was on him in seconds. It attacked him tentatively, though, sensing only the tiniest amount of human blood on the Glock's flesh that usually held no appeal. Fereshka's screams meant the Sabatine was thrashing him, though, just as Ivan had assumed it would. Soon the Sabatine retreated back to its hiding place in the brush, leaving the Glock sliced and moaning but alive, his chest heaving for air. "Are you going to kill me for what I know about you?" "No," Ivan responded to Ben's relief, but his reprieve was momentary. "I'm going to kill you for killing Hannibal." Ben shook his head and held his hand up. For a moment his shoulders were rigid with dignity. He would do this job himself. The man pressed the red suicide button on his collar once and then twice. He hesitated to press it the third and final time, the bravery draining from him. Impatient and annoyed, Ivan reached over and pressed it for him. Their eyes met for just an instant as the shock went through Ben and he was dead before he could blink again. The husk of a man rolled to his side, blue eyes vacant and empty. Watching Ben die made Ivan wonder about mortal people. If by some cosmic design or laughing deity they woke up somewhere else when they died like he did, their souls enjoying new bodies. In Ben's case, he hoped not. You just stay a corpse, got it? "So, Fereshka, I really enjoyed your little joke," Ivan called to the suffering being below. Blue and red hovered nearby, screeching out a translation in unison. The Glocks writhed, its dark, sticky blood staining the dirt. Red descended on him, using a gentle laser to cauterize his wounds. The Sabatine emerged to attack the machine, but Blue caught it in a yellow suspensor beam, grabbing it out of the air as if with a giant fist. Ivan continued, "I'm taking you back to my place, so you'll help me with these wonderful creatures. Sound good? I'll heal you too. You'll never really be all that well, though. Sabatine sure can tear you apart, huh?" Wrapped in a suspensor field, Blue lifted the Sabatine from the habitat, and Red did the same for Fereshka. As they walked through the common room, Fereshka rolled his head at the carnage around him, taking in the slaughter with unbelieving eyes. "I liked your joke. Did you like my little joke?" Ivan asked the Glocks floating next to him, one of his arms hanging down. "Joke," Fereshka said in English as they departed the fairy castle and passed the humans still nervously huddled around the fire. "My joke is that I killed everyone you loved," Ivan said buoyantly. "Joke," Fereshka croaked again and again, each time his wrecked body forcing an awful, wheezing laugh. As they loaded into the 42, a caravan of Highland droplifters descended from the sky and formed a glowing ring around the Alamo as they landed. The droplifters were filled with drones like Red and Blue that would collect the other Sabatine. Ivan watched the machine stream into the complex, tentacles trailing. He thought of his brothers. By now, Sergei and Tomas were aware that Hannibal was dead. Ivan would have to explain how and why, as they wouldn't be able to bear downloading his final moments. Ivan guided Red to put Fareshka into the cryogenic chamber, the same one that had previously sustained him for so long. As Ivan closed the door, the Glocks was still laughing. "Yes, me and my brothers are possibly the best joke you'll ever hear,"